Today's presenters are Lucidworks Senior Search Engineer, Evan Sayer, and Enterprise Content Management and Big Data Architect for the County of Sacramento, Guy Sperry. Thanks for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Leah. So let's dive in. Replacing GSA with Lucidworks Fusion is what we're going to be talking about today. First, though, I wanted to take a quick opportunity to talk about our upcoming user conference, Lucene Revolution, Lucene Solr Revolution. If you haven't been before, it's seriously one of the best tech conferences going. It's very technically focused, tons of interesting sessions. So if you're free October 11th to 14th and can make it to Boston, we really recommend it. It's a great time. And you'll learn a ton as well. All right, so just some quick background on Lucidworks here. Founded in 2007, and we're generally the commercial entity behind the open source Apache Lucene Solr project. So we contribute 70% of the code that's committed to the open source project and generally control some of the direction of where it's going, et cetera. We build a search platform on top of the open source search engine called Lucidworks Fusion. And this is the GSA replacement product we'll be talking about today. And for anyone who's not familiar, Apache Solr is the most popular open source enterprise search engine on Earth. It's been around since maybe 2002, 2004 or so, and it's itself built on top of Apache Lucene. So the Google Search Appliance, the product we're going to be talking about replacing with Fusion today, hopefully most people on the call will be familiar with it if you're looking to replace it. It was Google's enterprise search solution that they offered for almost 15 years. It's going to be fully end of life later in 2018, but you can no longer purchase the hardware. And that's kind of the biggest thing it had going for it, is that it was one-stop shopping, a complete enterprise search solution in one yellow or blue box. So you got the Google logo as well, which is helpful in selling it internally, et cetera. But this product is no longer available, as I'm sure most of you are aware, and support will be phased out completely by 2018. So we're going to start by talking about some of the things that the GSA did well. It had a lot going for it. We'll go through how those features are enhanced or at parity in Fusion. And then we'll talk through some of the areas where the GSA was not so strong and how Fusion can help you fill some of those gaps. Quite often what we find converting customers from GSA to Fusion is that we get the baseline search parity. We'd attain that relatively quickly. And then all of a sudden, once they understand the concepts available in Fusion, they'd want to build out a whole lot more than what GSA was ever able to do, just because we give you a whole lot more control, more granular visibility into the logic of the actual search engine itself. So that'll be the rough structure. We'll walk through what GSA did well and how Fusion has that same functionality or better. And then we'll walk through some of the ways in which you can actually enhance your search experience by moving off of GSA onto Fusion. So I think the first and most important GSA strength, and I'm sure this would be felt by a lot of the people on the call, is that it was easy to set up and configure. I actually worked with it directly, briefly back in probably like 2011 or so, before I came to Lucidworks, doing some other search consulting. And it was nice that, from the time you turned it on, you might not need to spend more than like a few days at most just getting a basic search app up and running. So you could point its web crawler, which is of course Google's bread and butter. You could point the GSA's web crawler at your content, or whether you've got content in websites or repositories, what have you. Point GSA at that data. It would ingest it without too much configuration at all on your part. And as we'll see further on in the presentation, that's a double-edged sword. GSA allowed you to get sort of decent search experience quite quickly and easily without doing a whole lot of work, but didn't always give you enough room to customize after you'd attained that baseline level of quality of search results, et cetera. So what we see as the takeaway from what GSA did well here is that it minimized your required investment in true technical expertise. It kind of covered up a lot of the complexity of the average search problem, which is good. It's certainly good for starting out when you haven't yet gained the level of expertise yourself that you might need to go really tweak lower level relevancy type factors. But eventually you do end up understanding things well enough and you might want that access. So when it comes to replacing GSA with Fusion, we have a similar set of tooling out of the box that makes getting started quite straightforward. So the Fusion Index Workbench, or as you'll see it called in our current release, the Fusion Pipeline Simulator, it's a way to very quickly connect to and ingest your data. So if you need to crawl a website or some content in a database or SharePoint, what have you, you can point Fusion at that right out of the box, right from the first sort of start screen. It will sample that data source and bring in a certain number of documents so that you can sort of see what it's getting out of the box. And then it allows you to quickly and intuitively iterate from there, adding facets, changing relevancy rankings, and looking at side-by-side search results, et cetera, to sort of tweak relevancy logic or even some of the ETL, depending on where you might want to extract certain metadata from the data, et cetera. That's sort of our answer to getting started, the out-of-the-box experience the GSA gave you. And it was really nice and simple, and so is Fusion's. When it comes to ongoing maintenance, Fusion ships with a number of useful applications out of the box for monitoring the search app as well. So we've got a dashboarding platform called Silk that is right there out of box in Fusion that lets you get sort of a visualization of all of the searches that are happening in your app over time, the most popular ones, the most common zero-hit searches, et cetera. And also monitoring and alerting APIs. So this is where Google sometimes fell down. It wasn't so easy to figure out the state of the app or when you might need more hardware, et cetera, which was also a challenge with GSA, scaling out the application. So Fusion integrates with any number of the most common monitoring tools out there, Zabbix, Nagios, the HP product, Open, I forget what it's called. That was what I was just working with. But yeah, so the out-of-box experience and sort of the baseline management of getting a decent search app up and running, we provide a similar level, or I would argue higher level of ease of use out of box in that arena. So another GSA strength, the out-of-box search UI. This is incredibly useful in the development of a search app, right? So you just need something to look at to see how you're moving the needle as you tweak relevancy, as you tweak metadata extraction to bring in data from different places. Even as you test security, you want to be able to try searches as different users, et cetera, and verify visually that they're seeing the data they're allowed to see. So Google provided, of course, their sort of skinnable version of the google.com search UI, roughly. I've got a screenshot of it over there. That's actually a huge, useful thing to do, just providing any baseline search UI. And again, they're minimizing your necessary investment in technical expertise, right? You don't need to buy software to develop a UI, nor do you necessarily need a whole team working on its design. When it comes to Fusion, we instead ship an open source UI called Lucidworks View. Screenshot of it there to the right. And it's, if anything, much more customizable and skinnable than the GSA UI that ships with it out of the box. I think the biggest takeaway here is that it's in fact open source as well. So it follows from the sort of nature of the UI problem that it's pretty tough to make an out-of-box UI that covers all of the corner cases. Instead, you sort of have to focus on allowing people to easily customize, which is what we've done instead. So Lucidworks View is built on top of a modern stack as well. It's built using Angular, so it's quite straightforward to find people to work on your search UI app if you base it on top of Vue. And if you have any problems with it, if you need a new feature, if you wish to modify it in any way, it is completely, truly open source. So you can even submit a pull request, and we would consider integrating it into Vue. Okay, third major GSA strength that we've identified working with customers is just having really broad support for connecting to a bunch of different types of data out of the box. So this means that when you flip on your yellow appliance, or in the case of Fusion, when you flip on your Fusion services we'll be talking about, right away you have the ability to ingest data from, in the case of Fusion, over 40 different common sources. And it's once again sort of the same kind of takeaway. GSA tries to minimize your necessary investment in technical expertise. That's exactly what we're trying to do with Fusion as well with the connectors. This is actually a little screenshot from our website at the bottom here of this page. There's really not a lot of joy in maintaining a bunch of connectors, so we do it for you. I've got a list of the small percentages in here, and all of them are secured as well. So there was a note on the last slide about that, I believe. That's a huge value out of both GSA and Fusion right out of the box, just being able to secure your content without any additional effort. In the case of pushing data into the index instead, Fusion also offers the index pipeline functionality. So I'll talk a bit more in depth about index pipelines later on, but this is one sort of place where GSA shut down your access, right? So you set up a data source in GSA, and it crawled it using its sort of opaque crawling process, and you didn't get a whole lot of control over how you might munge the metadata that results from ingesting that content. Index pipelines are our answer to sort of infinitely customizable ETL. As soon as a document is crawled by one of our connectors, it's sent off to the index pipeline, which is simply a series of steps that can do any number of transformations to the content that you want, including writing your own custom index pipeline stages. And if that's not enough, if sort of transforming the content through the pipeline after it's been crawled doesn't satisfy what your use case requires, then you can even build your own connector through Fusion's Connectors API, which I believe GSA also did enable you to do, but not particularly easily. Okay, so there's sort of three principal strengths of GSA we talked about there that I think if you're a GSA app owner right now, you would definitely want to see in some search, in a search solution to replace it. Fusion covers all of those, but in addition to being easy to use out of the box, providing a huge suite of connectors and having a UI, sort of the baseline GSA functionality that was a lot of what you're paying for, I would argue. Fusion also addresses some of GSA's biggest weaknesses, and I think this first one here out of a couple that I'll talk about on this slide is really the most important. GSA rarely gave you the level of control, the granularity that you might need to tune a search app, to tune relevancy, to tweak metadata extraction, to do custom security. All of these kinds of tasks were not exactly supported, or if you could make them work, it was sort of a hacky solution quite often. And the best example I found just sort of looking back through some of the GSA documentation is that if you want to bias results based on where they're from, just like a really simple tweak to scoring in the Fusion world, you're right away sort of boxed into these three settings, strong, medium, weak, without much understanding of what's really happening under the hood. So in Fusion, we've attempted to not hide the complexity, but rather design our software so that it reveals itself in a way that makes sense to you once you've understood that the order of the documents coming back in search results is determined by some relevancy algorithm and some of the basic inputs to that. You might really get to the point where you want to tweak it at a more granular level than strong, medium, weak, etc. The same was true over the control of indexing flow. So if you had a problem as simple as, on these particular HTML pages on this site, I want my title to be extracted from a different place than the title tag. That was not so trivial with GSA. You were pretty much expected to create meta tags for anything you might want. And that involves editing the actual content in a whole different system. So the difference with Fusion is that while we make it quite easy to get data in and get started, from there you can customize to your heart's content. So a document as represented in the index pipeline after it's been crawled by one of our connectors, for the more technically minded among you, it's kind of just like a map, essentially, of fields and values. And you can transform those in any way you wish, either using one of our built-in stages, of which I'll talk about a few examples later, or even just writing your own stage using our APIs. The possibilities are pretty infinite. So you can think of calling out to external systems, enriching documents with metadata from databases, etc. All of those are totally doable with Fusion. So many of these criticisms led to GSA sort of being called a black box design. It's important to know that that was on purpose too. So back in the day, Google's biggest concern in doing this, like the appliance, it could have represented almost like more of a liability than anything, right? Like they were so far ahead in the early 2000s, well, and they still are, but they were so far ahead in internet search that the GSA needed to be a black box because they didn't want anyone else getting access to their technology, essentially. Fusion is anything but. So it's got our open source core, of course, like we talked about with Apache Solr, the most popular search engine on earth. We've got Lucidworks Fusion, our open source UI that you can customize. I mean, it was fairly difficult to skin the GSA UI in such a way that it looked very meaningfully different from Google's own UI. I'm sure it could be done with a lot of work. But with View, it's just simple config file-based configuration, and you can change the actual logic of View if you'd like as well. It's all there for you to do with as you please. Okay, so another GSA weakness, this one is really key for certain use cases. It was non-trivial to scale. So the appliance packaging is convenient in that you get a search solution in a box. That's nice, but if you need to scale up beyond the capacity of that one search appliance, the fact that there aren't sort of more granular units to scale by than entire appliances is pretty limiting. Like imagine your indexing requirements really haven't changed much at all, but all of a sudden the number of users querying at peak load doubles. So that's the problem that you can scale up with at a more granular level using Fusion and our set of services rather than our one opaque sort of appliance model. So you can scale up the capacity of the cluster specifically for querying without touching your indexing logic on another set of nodes. And of course there's the per document pricing model. I'm sure anyone on the phone who's owned a GSA is familiar with the downsides of that as you grow. The last one, so incorrect fast accounts. I see that on there just because it's not a problem on the scale of these others when it comes to implementing a GSA search solution, but it is just kind of like a Whiskey Tango Foxtrot from Google there. Fusion certainly won't return incorrect fast accounts, which I'll touch on right at the end again. I've been talking about these Fusion services. So now that we've gone through kind of what GSA does well and some of the things it really does poorly, we're going to dive into exploring how Fusion answers those questions, those problems at a more granular level. And the key thing to take away from this slide is just that Fusion is a series of services that can be deployed separately. So we have a connector service whose job it is to go out and ingest content, pull it in from your data sources. We have a query sort of API service whose job it is to take in search requests and transform them or enrich them with our signals API, et cetera. And you can scale these components of the platform independently. So if your problem isn't adding more content sources, instead your problem is adding more query capacity, you can scale out just the nodes whose purpose is to handle queries, and your connectors nodes can sort of stay off to the side. It's not all just one appliance that where you can only scale in one non-granular unit, if you will. So let's talk about index pipelines. I've got a couple examples here of the kind of things that you can do in the ETL process in Fusion that would not be so trivial in GSA. And remember, the index pipeline is the Fusion construct that processes documents after some connector pulls them in. Or if you want, you can just push your documents into the index pipeline over REST. So say you want to redact some set of keywords only from a certain source, or for a certain source you want to extract the title in some different customized way. You want to look up groups in some completely foreign external system. You can do all of these things right from the index pipeline as documents are being fed in. And to sort of highlight the open-endedness of it, we have a particular index pipeline stage, and index pipelines in general are composed of these constructs called stages, which are just finite steps that modify the document in some way. We have a stage where you can just pretty much write arbitrary code in JavaScript actually, and write from the UI if you're interested in doing that. On the query side, it's the same sort of fine-grained control, except with query pipelines, instead of dealing in documents that are being modified as content is ingested, we're instead talking about requests. It's the same sort of model, though. It's just a series of steps that allow you to modify the request, or in the case of query pipelines, there's sort of a secondary data structure as well. After you get the response back from Solr, you can also modify that. So sort of some high-level business problems here. For queries containing a certain keyword, you might want to rewrite the query to be something else, and that might be contingent on any number of other factors, like if you're doing e-commerce web search, maybe in a certain season for a certain user from a certain place, you might rewrite things in a custom way. That kind of logic was mostly handled inside application layer code rather than the GSA itself. In Fusion, you can do it right there in the query pipeline. And the second two examples are kind of sort of, they follow from the same vein. So if you want to boost results that or if you want to boost documents matching in a different set of fields depending on the language, let's say, you could even detect the language of the query and decide that you want to dynamically pick which set of fields to search on. And you might analyze the text in certain fields in different ways to make matching better when it's language specific. Or you might just use the query pipeline to do redaction of the actual documents when they're sent back. That's sort of the third example there. Then we've got Fusion signals. So this is another element of the query processing in Fusion where increased granularity, increased control, increased feedback from the system allows you to improve search relevancy. So the signals in Fusion amount to a separate API where you can post what document a user actually clicked on for a given query. And your app or the UI or Lucidworks View would just send that back through Fusion Signals API. And those clicks are collected and aggregated over time automatically. And as more and more users run queries and they run the same queries and click on some document that's currently ranked 5th, let's say, by the natural relevance algorithm inside Solr, as more and more users click that document, Fusion will slowly but surely boost it towards the top of the list. And that all happens in an unsupervised, sort of in the background fashion without any manual human input. It's kind of the gold standard in improving search relevancy, and unlike GSA, which did have some sort of rudimentary click boosting, we give you full control over how you want to model your signals. So you could give a bigger boost for, let's say, if you're an e-commerce site, a user adding something to their cart. That could be a stronger signal that when they did this query, this is the item they actually went and bought. We give you full control over sort of the weighting of the signals and how they feed back into the relevancy algorithm. Finally, if you're already familiar with Solr and Lucene, those are the underlying back-end search technologies that we actually call out to at the end of the index and query pipeline processes. If you're already familiar with those, we don't hide any of the complexity you can utilize there. So if you're a Solr or Lucene guru, just hack away. Fusion won't take anything away from you, which is great. Again, the opposite of sort of the black box design philosophy. So scaling. Much of our functionality here derives from the simple fact that we're built on top of Apache Solr, which scales to billions of documents linearly. Adding additional capacity to Fusion for querying, or in the case of needing additional Solr nodes for indexing, is quite straightforward. There's an API that's actually a part of Solr that can just be sort of one REST API call. Once you've set up a new node and installed Fusion on it, it's just one REST API call to ask it to replicate the index and put a new copy on that node and spin it up to be an additional query node from then on. With GSA, you're looking at essentially licensing a whole new appliance, and you may very well not need that. So if you're only running out of capacity for querying, or if you're only running out of capacity in your connectors in Fusion, then you might want to scale up just that one piece, and it gives you more flexibility in the hardware you choose, et cetera. And the straightforward APIs and processes here, that's what I was mentioning earlier. If you're spinning up a new node, just install Fusion, and our install is just a simple TARD set of libraries, et cetera. Just install Fusion, spin it up, and point it at the central cluster manager, and you'll have a new Fusion node. You can easily select to have that Fusion node only run subset of the Fusion services as well, like I was talking about, if you want to scale out individual parts of the app. And this last note here, for anyone who's already operating any Solr clusters, you can drop Fusion right on top of it, and it will manage any existing cluster as well. So some final notes here on just Fusion as a platform. We started by talking about sort of the GSA strengths, what it did well. I think those are covered pretty pretty fairly by this first set of points here. So it allowed you to get started with ease, which meant that it had broad connectivity to a bunch of data sources, which we also have in Fusion, of course. We actually have a facility where we can convert a GSA connector into a Fusion connector as well, to leverage what's already there from GSA for some of the really obscure content sources, perhaps. But it let you get started easily by pointing it at your data as Fusion does. You can get a simple baseline search app up and running really quickly with Lucidworks View, and then from there, unlike GSA, you can customize the app as much as you want. There's very little that we hide from you if you go looking. So that leads to the next point here about Fusion as sort of a platform in general. You're certainly welcome to delve into any of the complexity of all that Fusion can do, but you don't have to. I think quite probably if you're currently a GSA admin or have done a lot of work on GSA, it might seem like why would we want to even bother diving into all of this complexity. But the reality is that you can make relevancy quite a bit better without too much work in Fusion than what you get out of the box with GSA. The nature of enterprise search is just kind of quite different from internet search, what Google is really good at. Oftentimes our apps are pretty specialized. They don't have to consider a breadth of content nearly so wide as the internet. So once you understand sort of the framework, the moving parts of Fusion, it's quite likely that you will want to do some customization and that you'll reap the rewards of creating a better search experience that way. And in fact, this last bullet point here, I should mention, you can even implement your own Fusion components in Java, generally speaking. If you want to write your own index pipeline stage or write your own connector, that's all totally doable. We expose APIs for those things. The last major point here is you could scale with minimal effort with Fusion compared to GSA especially. It's a lot less heavy in that regard, and you can scale up individual parts of the app as needed, which is a great, it makes things a lot more flexible, right? So if you only want to scale up one component, your connectors or your query nodes or your signals processing, that's easy and straightforward to do. Not to mention that the per node instead of per doc pricing certainly is going to mean fewer surprises when it comes to renewing your license. Here's just a quote from one of the customers we've converted from GSA to Fusion already. So Fusion gave us the features we needed to replace Google Search Appliance in a matter of weeks. With Fusion's out-of-the-box capabilities, we skipped a month in our dev cycle so we could focus our team where they would have the most impact. We cut our licensing costs by 50%. Sorry about that. We cut our licensing costs by 50% and improved application usability. The Lucidworks professional service team amplified our success even further. So this is a shop that has been using GSA for a fairly long time, I believe. And they converted to Fusion without much trouble, and in fact have delved deeper into those details I was talking about to really improve the app quite a bit. Here's sort of a subset of the customers we've converted already, and that actually leads me to the next part of our presentation. I'm really pleased to have one of our customers we've worked with on converting from GSA to Fusion here to talk about that. Guy Sperry will be continuing in the slides here. I've just got one last slide here. We do in fact provide accurate, fast accounts. You don't need to worry about that. And if you're looking to try out Fusion, please just go take it for a spin by downloading it from our website. Okay, so I think I'll turn it over to Guy.
Thanks, Evan. So as Evan said, my name is Guy Sperry. I'm currently serving as the Enterprise Content Management and Big Data Architect for the County of Sacramento. So what I'd like to do today is just give you enough of an introduction to the county to lay some context to what I'll be talking about. And then I'd like to share why Sacramento County has become search first for our data delivery needs and how we're using Fusion to help meet a lot of those needs. And I'll finish up by talking about how Fusion has helped us fill gaps that were left by the retirement of Google Search Appliance. So the County of Sacramento is comprised of 34 departments and other affiliated organizations, and we serve about 1.5 million people in Northern California. The County Board of Supervisors has maintained a pretty long tradition of commitment to open government and transparency. And also the county likes to take every reasonable opportunity to promote citizen engagement, both in county programs and also in the political process. So a good example of this is earlier this year, the county partnered with Code for America to host a 6-week hackathon, really centered around our open data portal. And we awarded monetary prizes to the top 3 entrants that developed open source solutions that made use of this public open data to meet needs in the community, a couple of which we didn't even previously know about. We were honored to have Lucidworks' Tim Potter come out and be a judge at our closing event, so that was pretty fun. So why is Sacramento County Search first? Well, as I mentioned, we've got 34 departments, but that really represents over 100 lines of business, and we span the entire spectrum of regional and local government. And so we end up doing a lot of business with smaller niche type vendors, and we wind up with a lot of custom line of business applications vendor supplied. We also have a lot of enterprise applications and homegrown data snackers. So we still have several applications running on Software AG database on our mainframe. We've got just about every flavor of RDBMS that exists out there, the big commercial players, but also some of the smaller open source ones. We've got a fledgling Hadoop system and a few enterprise content management sort of interdepartmental systems, and then numerous more specialized kind of single purpose systems. And so this creates a very diverse and heterogeneous data environment. We've got one of the best DBA teams I've ever encountered, and they really do a good job of caring for all this. But a challenge that we frequently encounter from the delivery perspective is how can we securely deliver prompt access to relevant data? Our data challenges or the needs often cross departmental lines, some headed by appointed, some headed by elected officials, different budgets, regulatory environments, and certainly a lot of fragmented technology. So Fusion has been a big help for us. One of the first things we implemented with Fusion was document search. So as I mentioned, we've got a few larger interdepartmental content management systems and then a bunch of single-purpose document management systems. So the challenge for the consumers of this information is not only do they have to search in multiple places to get the information they need, but they have to deal with the disparity of features between those different systems. What we can do with Fusion is take all of the documents from all those repositories, all the content, the associated metadata, and we can, and even the security context, and index them into Fusion. We can then create search applications that give the best of breed search features that Fusion offers and allow those documents to continue to reside in their source systems for workflow, records management, and business processes. Another thing we're doing with Fusion is kind of changing how we can deliver spatial data. So the county maintains geospatial information on, just about everything you can imagine, from every feature of parcel and survey maps to every street light, utility line, pipe, and manhole cover. It's all been drawn out in our GIS system. So with Fusion, we can take all of those complex geometrical shapes, their data attributes, and we can throw in other things like geocoded documents and data from other systems, and we can create applications and also use Fusion as a secure API endpoint to allow people to do spatial search. Center point, bounding box, and even complex geometric searches. They can get relevancy ranked results with facets and even spatial facets now. And all this can be done in a matter of milliseconds. So it's not just the features, but the performance that really changes how we can deliver this information both internally and then externally to the public. And one thing we're doing more recently with Fusion is cross-source data processing and analytics. And we've been using the analytical features of Solr for quite a while now. But Lucidworks in more recent versions of Fusion has added the Spark engine, and in the most recent versions made that available for general purpose. And what that means is for semi-structured and unstructured data where conventional wisdom would point you definitely in a Hadoop type solution, we can now, when we know that the data is going to be in Solr anyways, we can use the library of connectors that are in Fusion to pull this data in from various sources, use Spark to process it, and then move it on to Solr for search and analysis. One of the first things we implemented with Fusion at the county was log analysis. So we had identified a bit of a data gap in our SIM product for just a particular type of security event. And what we were able to do with Fusion is take some of our infrastructure logs and index them into Solr, and then use Lucidworks Silk product to create some dashboards and do the analysis to fill that data gap. Now, when this was demoed around the organization, the people that really took note were the application layer people, application administrators, and the developers. So I think where infrastructure and server people are really accustomed to having the instrumentation to get that operational intelligence, at least in our case at the application layer, that's a little bit more rare. So we started indexing some of these application logs and developing solutions around that, and it really has spread like wildfire to the point that now we've created custom Log4Net and Log4j appenders that log directly to Fusion so that we can take advantage of additional features such as alerting. And then sort of the most recent thing I think we're doing with Fusion now is looking at its NoSQL capabilities. I think it was like a year ago that we first heard Grant Ingersoll from Lucidworks talking about Solr's NoSQL capabilities. And at the time, I don't think we took much note, but with the release of Solr 6, I think it's become pretty obvious that Solr has thrust itself into that NoSQL space, and from a feature perspective is competing very well. So we are a mean stack shop, and that means for custom application development, our first choice in technology is writing single-page web applications on Node.js with Express Web Services, and then using a NoSQL data store. Traditionally, that has meant like Mongo or Cassandra, but since we've developed such a depth of knowledge with Solr, we are now evaluating Solr for use as the primary data store, which then adds in all of those search and analytical features. So I hope some of that was interesting to you. What I'd like to talk about now is our experience with Google Search Appliance. So here's a picture that we took in our office, kind of indicates how we feel about it. So as a public entity, we have a pretty long and rigorous budgetary cycle, and so I don't think with the abruptness of the announcement of retirement of Google Search that we had the time and resources to do the kind of comprehensive migration plan that we would have liked to do. And at the time, we weren't aware of Lucidworks' depth of knowledge and the tools they have to make this so painless. So we were an early adopter of GSA, and so had a bit of an idea that some of these uses had become a little stale. So when we went out and surveyed the user community, we found that indeed some of it could have been just shut down, which we did. And the remaining ones just had to be, listed out and prioritized. So the first real conversion we did was our Agenda Search website. So agendasearch.saccounty.net. A little background on this. The Brown Act is a piece of legislation in the state of California that is intended to make public meetings accessible to citizens and help maintain transparency for public entities. So the requirements of this legislation are that we post agendas prior to meetings occurring and then maintain records of business conducted and decisions made in those meetings. The county likes to go well above and beyond these requirements. So we publish detailed agendas with a lot of information on each agenda item, as well as all supporting documentation well in advance of any meeting. We publish it online, and we actually have kiosks in county facilities. So if for some reason you don't have internet access, you can go to a county facility and review this information. So these meetings are rather frequent, but even still, all this documentation, when compiled into a package, is routinely well over 1,000 pages. And that's not terribly consumable for someone who's really only interested in one item in the agenda. So we can take Fusion and index all of this documentation and the information about these meetings and allow the public to search through that and give them cool features like contextual snippets and highlighting and even some facets to filter to get the information they need. We can also do some integration with our agenda management system. So when searching for documents, we provide a link to the document, but also a link to a page specific for that agenda. We broadcast our public meetings live online and then also on our local government affairs channel. And then we keep that meeting available online in perpetuity. So if you go and click on one of the agenda items, we bookmark that video since they're frequently many hours long, and it will take you directly to the place in that video where that item is being addressed. So recently, actually, we were able to replace our homegrown user interface for this website with Lucidworks View. So if you go to agendasearch.saccounty.net, aside from a little bit of styling and some configuration, you're looking at the out-of-the-box View product. And we don't have really a lot of statistics on the previous search solution for this. So the only thing that we can really gauge the success of this new Fusion-based solution by is that we have seen a reduction in public records requests, and we just have to assume that's because the search experience is better and people can find what they need online. So the last thing I want to talk about today is just a story about how powerful and easy this technology has become. So one of the lower priority GSA conversions we had was our county legal counsel. And they maintain a 2 million document archive of legal documents that wasn't migrated to their new line of business application for licensing reasons. So when we went to talk to them about converting over to a new solution, they said they don't really get a volume of requests for these documents, and when they do, it references a specific case number and they can just navigate to that document and provide it. So several months ago, after we had shut down our GSA, they did receive a pretty broad-reaching request, and sadly what staff were doing over there was sort of a Windows File Explorer search on all of the content, these 2 million documents, and obviously that wasn't working. So with about 2 days left to meet this request, early one morning the request for help came across my desk. And so immediately my thought was to use Fusion to help them out. But coincidentally, 2 days prior to this, Lucidworks had reached out prior to the release of View and asked us if we would like to take it out for a spin. Of course, we said yes. And so this morning that this was happening, I was able to take Fusion and their file system connector, point it at these documents, and kick off an indexing job that went through and pulled out all the content and all the attributes that were there in these files, and also preserve file security. In the meantime, I installed View and did a little bit of branding and tweaking of the configuration. And quite literally, before I left for lunch that day, I was able to send this customer a link to a full-featured search application that gave them everything they needed to do the research to get all the documents and meet this request. So I just don't think that there is another product out there that has anything close to this feature set, but can also be delivered in this kind of time frame. So on the product page, I believe still is a quote from the bureau chief that I work for, talking about how satisfied he was with this solution. And with that, I'll just say that I will be at Revolution in October, and I really love geeking out on all this stuff. And so I hope to see many of you there and learn what other people are doing with search. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy and Evan. So now we will begin the Q&A portion of the webinar. We did have some questions come through, and again, if you have questions that you want to ask, you can go ahead and continue to enter them in the chat box. Any that we don't get to today, we will follow up with you separately. So the first question is for you, Evan. With Fusion, are you able to extract metadata from image and video content?
Yes, so short answer is just yes, but I could elaborate a bit. We utilize a content processing framework called Apache Tika to extract metadata from files and just generally to parse the text out of files. So virtually anything supported by Tika we can extract metadata from, and that includes the vast majority of common image and video formats.
Thank you. The next question, I believe, will be for you again, Evan. What is the ease of integrating with my current search app using Fusion as opposed to integrating with GSA?
Okay, good sweeping question here. I'm going to take the current search app there to mean sort of you already have like a search UI or a search middle tier, et cetera. And then, so comparing the ease of integrating with that in Fusion versus GSA, obviously it's kind of an it depends answer, but I would say on average integrating with Fusion is going to be easier, going to be more straightforward. Integrating with GSA was often more complex because what really worked well with GSA was the one box sort of everything's included solution where you use their UI, and there really didn't necessarily need to be a middle tier. Fusion assumes quite often that you might have your own search UI that you would make. We ship View as well as a search user interface right in the admin part of Fusion for work during development or possibly to use as your front end, as Guy was saying. It's a huge time to value proposition to consider. But quite often our customers will make their own search UIs. Our customers are, certainly some of them are running public internet-facing apps using Fusion, including e-commerce type sites. So given that expectation on the part of our Fusion development team, we've made it quite straightforward to integrate with your own sort of search UI. If that's what I'm taking this custom current search app to mean. Everything is REST-based. It's all sort of completely standardized. Your calls to query pipelines are simple HTTP GETs with authentication. And if you want to secure Fusion, it's mostly a matter of getting it set up to run with SSL in place at the web container layer. Yeah, GSA was just more rigid in this regard in that they're mostly designing towards you running a UI that they also have built, and perhaps you skin it with some custom CSS or something. Whereas in Fusion, we assume that you might very well be integrating our back-end search platform with your own search app on the front end. So it should be easier on average, I would think.
Thank you. So the next question is for you, Guy. And you touched on this a little bit, but I will ask it again. What has the feedback from end users been after the conversion to Fusion?
Well, the feedback from the users that we deal with has been good. I think we perhaps scaled GSA as Evan was talking about the black box scenario, we perhaps went a little over where we should have been, but didn't have enough to scale up to adding a fourth appliance. So the biggest thing that we've been getting out of this has been through the performance. And I think people like the out-of-the-box Google because people spend so much time on Google. So our ability to begin doing more styling and moving it that way, sometimes it's just the user interface that people want. But from the ability to get the information they want in a timely fashion, I think we've seen more ability for users to get that easily. And then what I mentioned about the reduction in public records requests, that I think is pretty obvious for the public.
Great, thank you. So the next question I'll give to you, Evan. Can Fusion integrate both external and internal data sources?
Okay, yeah, so another one where short answer is definitely yes. It depends on what exactly you mean by internal and external, how I would sort of go about describing what Fusion does. But internal, I'll sort of take to mean data sources that you would pull in, I imagine. So content repositories like SharePoint, CRMs, et cetera. Whereas external data sources, you might mean like pushing content in from somewhere else, like a trigger in a database indexes a bunch of rows, or you push content in from your own Java application. And the answer is yes, because in the case of internal or sort of pulled in data, repositories and things, we have the Fusion connector framework with all of its out-of-box functionality to connect to different data sources, as well as the option of creating your own connector that then lives in the framework. And any connector pushes its content to some index pipeline, which is itself the answer to how we can deal with external data sources. You can push in content to an index pipeline and have the very same transformations applied that content pulled in by a connector would undergo as well. So yeah, the answer is yes. If there's like a more specific meaning to external or internal, feel free to just follow up with another question, and I can answer it more exactly if that didn't cover it.
Thank you. So the next question, does Lucidworks offer a framework for building custom connectors or for building connectors ourselves?
Yeah, another one with short answer, yes, definitely. I can elaborate a bit on sort of the work involved there. There's a couple different ways to go about it. So the first path you might take is looking at whether you can combine some of the existing connectors into some kind of a solution. Quite often, if it's a source that's just fundamentally served up via HTTP, you might be able to make the web crawler ingest it and extract metadata from the content to cover some of what you might get back in a more structured format from an API from such a system. That's not always the best way to go, though. So if you really are going to build your own custom connector, then you've still got more than one option. You can certainly do it right in Java using our connector's Java API. But if you want to avoid some of the complexity of that, of packaging software and having some additional dependencies in your Fusion install, we actually ship with a data source that allows you to sort of do custom logic within the scope of still just editing configuration in the UI. It basically lets you write the fetch process of the data source that goes out and fetches content as some simple JavaScript code. So that's another way to go about customizing content ingestion. Is you can take, and there's sort of a lot of helper methods there, and it makes it sort of more straightforward. You don't have to do as much of the boilerplate coding if you go and implement a JavaScript data source instead. But again, short answer, absolutely yes, but there's kind of a couple different angles where you can go about it depending on how much complexity you want to take on and how much you want to own, et cetera.
Great, thank you. The next question is for Guy. Did you use Fusion to index and provide a better search experience for GIS content? Or did you unify the GIS index with other indices and see relations?
Let me see if I understand that correctly. So what we've done with GIS is taken a lot of spatial data, most of it from our GIS system, and again, tip my hat to our DBA team because they've been able to provide that data in a way that we can easily get it into Fusion and Solr without having to do a custom connector. And then what we're doing is using Fusion itself as sort of a secure API endpoint that other applications can build on that. So it's really about taking all of the information and putting it in one place so that it can be rapidly searched against.
Thank you. Next question, Evan. How does Fusion scale compared to GSA?
So the answer there, hopefully there's some content in the slides that's helpful too on that one, but the gist of it is that unlike GSA, Fusion is a set of discrete services that you can scale independently. So the granularity you have there is much greater. If you're adding 10 more content sources to ingest into your current Fusion index, that may or may not entail any additional need for querying capacity. Maybe you've got the same set of users and you in fact just need to scale up your connectors. In the GSA world, if your current set of appliances or your current Signal appliance can't handle ingesting that additional content, and they had sort of strict document count-based licensing restrictions and stuff, so that would have often been the case, I think, once you get to a certain number of documents. At that point, you're looking at an entire new appliance. Whereas in Fusion, you can scale out just the services that require that scaling out. So you should be able to use less as hardware as the underlying effect at the end. The general comparison of scaling between Fusion and GSA, I would say it's just that Fusion is quite a bit more flexible. And also in terms of document count per unit hardware, Solr can generally host many more documents per shard or per box, per node than GSA was able to. Obviously that's hugely variable because what a document might be, it could be a log line or a book. It just depends. But in general, we've seen customers require less hardware by a lot once they upgrade from GSA to Fusion.
Great, thank you. So we're just coming up on the hour here, and in the interest of time, we're going to make that our last question. So thank you everyone who joined. Everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recording in the next few days, along with a link to the slides. If we didn't have time to answer your question, again, someone from the Lucidworks team will reach out to you. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to us at events@lucidworks.com. Thank you, Evan and Guy, for your presentations today, and we hope everyone has a great day.